Welcome to The Secret Truth. I'm George Butler. Along with me this evening is Tony Gosling from Bristol, England. And we're going to bring you up to date on some really good stories out of the UK. And also there's one or two out of the European Union. Welcome to our program, Tony Gosling.
Thanks ever so much. I always appreciate getting a call from you, George, because over here I'm finding it increasingly difficult to do my job as a journalist. I mean, this is, it's like a wall of lies, and people like me are having more and more difficulty actually punching through that wall.
Yes, there's more and more censorship happening on all levels. Facebook has this algorithm. I'm not seeing on my news feed on Facebook, I'm not seeing nearly the explosive news articles that I saw just months ago or several months ago. How about yourself?
Well, yes, exactly the same. And I would just point to one article which was originally on Washington's blog, which there's a really good, on medium.com, there's a really good article on there with somebody who tried to share this article on Facebook, and it's absolutely, the thing with Washington's blog, one of the things I love about it, and I've written one article for it, so I'm slightly biased, but what they did, it's a privately funded blog. It's brilliant, I think, because I wrote an article for them, and they sent it back to me, George, and they said, there's not enough links in here, yeah? Right. You put some more links in, yeah? So the idea being is right throughout an article, especially if you're writing about something contentious, anyone that's reading it that thinks, oh, I doubt that, they can just click through to the evidence from the blog. Now,
that's good. That's good, yeah.
It's really good. It's that gives it robustness and integrity that the mainstream media and actually quite a lot of the alternative media lack. The idea that you can stand a story up. Washington's blog will not publish stuff. At least, certainly that's what I've seen in the past, and with my experience with them, my article was about the 7/7 London bombings, and it was one of, I think, the most comprehensive looks at all of the various aspects of 7/7. It's not been endorsed by the victims' families, but I've been doing interviews with these people with their total knowledge of the article. So they aren't endorsing the article, but they're certainly not afraid to talk to me because of having written this. And all of the stuff in there, George, including the infiltrator, that's what it was described by the security services to the victims' families, a guy called Martin McDade. He was a special boat service, special forces, and he was working with two of the four London bombers, Mohammed Siddiqui Khan and Jazad Tanweer, I think it was. But he was taking them to Cumbria, the Lake District, and other places in Britain to actually train them. So this is a former British Forces, Royal Navy, Special Boat Service guy, Special Forces, and apparently now he's vanished. That's what everyone tells me. But of course, this is extremely suspicious that you've got British Special Forces training people who later then go on to bomb London and kill over 50 people on the underground system. Of course, this bit of news has hardly made it through to anywhere, in fact, but it's, I've referenced it on there. So what I'm saying is Washington's blog published this, what I thought was a really good article, just I'm not sure about how long ago it was, but it was picked up by various other websites, and it's all about these false flag attacks. And it's documenting one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other, and it's quite clear that I think it's the actual article is called "False Flags Are Just a Conspiracy Theory, Admitted Fact?" And that's on Washington's blog. The actual article itself is on Educate, Inspire, Change, and it's the headline they've given, the same article, is "For those who don't believe in conspiracies, here are 58 admitted false flag attacks." Now, the article on medium.com, what it did was it explained, and it showed screenshots of the various messages that Facebook sent back to this user of that article, explaining why, it didn't explain why, it just said this article contravenes our community guidelines, and therefore you have been blocked from posting for a certain amount of time, and the post has been removed, blah, blah. So what's happening now is the mainstream media have got everybody with any brains onto social media, because that's the only way we can share good information about what's going on in the world. The mainstream corporate press is just simply not doing that. And now what they're doing is they're starting to pick off people one by one on on social media. I don't doubt it's not just Facebook that is doing this. Certainly, there's been a lot of talk of YouTube also taking videos down, and also demonetizing people who have been posting good stuff. And so that's, I think, really where we are now. Is they're starting to close down the big tech giants are starting to close down social media too. So just be aware that what you're seeing there is a great deal of interference in it. I'm sure you are, George, but this is a great bit of practical evidence that's actually happened.
Yeah, it's getting to be where they finally discovered that the web has a two-edged sword, and it can reveal and expose their inner workings of their networks and their power system. So they're imposing down people that are opposing.
We've all seen going on with what's happened in Zimbabwe. I think it's been fascinating for us because this is a former British colony. A lot of fighting going on back in the late 70s, early 80s between the British government and ZANU-PF and the revolutionaries down there in what was Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. But the way it's been reported, I think, is just a classic example of modern propaganda. So what they do is they're saying, isn't it wonderful? Mugabe's being overthrown. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? And when it comes to, I think it's Emmanuel Mnangagwa, the guy that's taken over, only once he's been installed as president does the media start to tell you, oh, yes, well, he's the guy who's behind all these various massacres. So it's a textbook bit of propaganda, bigging up the idea of overthrowing the president, only to tell the public afterwards that the guy that's replaced him is a maniac. Yeah.
Man, where are we going to end up on this? We're going to end up with this tyranny controlling the high technology.
Well, certainly there's definitely a big attempt, I think, in the last 6-8 months. I would suggest since the introduction of the Hitler's birthday algorithm by Google back in April, that there is definitely an attempt to control what the internet news. Okay, so massively down list some really important, excellent websites. I mean, there is still some fantastic stuff out there. For example, I can just give you a few examples. The Intercept in Brazil is brilliant. They're breaking stories all the time. And another one which is quite good, I like a lot, is antiwar.com. He's not a 9/11 truther, but a lot of the stuff he does on there is really tight, very, very well argued. Again, often linked and referenced, which is what you need. But when you say where are we heading, well, I think it's pretty obvious to me that we've seen the groundwork laid in the Middle East through the Bush and Blair illegal invasion of Iraq. And we now hear just this week that there are something like, I think it was 1,700 US troops in Syria, even though they haven't actually been properly declared by the Pentagon, and also that there has been no resolution in Congress to allow them to go to Syria, and no UN resolution to allow them to be there. And yet they're there, and what they'll be doing is training still the so-called rebel forces, who have been responsible, it looks like now, for all of the chemical weapons attacks we've seen, the two major ones at Ghouta and Idlib. These are the people we're still sponsoring. So as ISIS and al-Nusra are slowly being crushed by the Russians and by Assad, by the legitimate regime there, the government, elected, by the way, unlike Saudi Arabia. So as they're being crushed, there are new fronts opening. But I noticed just in one of the news services this week, I can't remember which one it was, George, but that there were reports in China, this is translated from China, I think it was Middle East Monitor, that the Chinese are now talking about, they're actually planning to send ground forces to Syria. This is a result of the US is illegally keeping, I would imagine the Brits are there too, of course, but they're keeping it very, very quiet, the Brits. And we've got effectively a MI6 government here in Britain, with Theresa May being the security services choice, MI5 she oversaw for many years and helped cover up things like the 7/7 bombings, for example, without organising a proper inquiry into that. Even though there were people lobbying her to do so, who I've spoken to. So there needs to be obviously an overhaul of the security services in Britain. There isn't any proper look at that. But what I'm saying here is the fact that they've managed to smuggle British troops, and certainly we know 1,700 US troops into Syria, means that, of course, the other members of the UN Security Council are going to look at this and say, well, you can't just do this without us having a reaction. That's why the Russians came in 2015, and why it looks like the Chinese are going to be boots on the ground in Syria now too.
Right. This tax bill passed late last night, early this morning, through the Senate. And it looked like Trump's going to put in a new tax law, reform tax law. So that was a big win for him, even though it's a mixed bag, I think, for everybody.
Look, the great, massive increase in military spending.
I know it doesn't weigh out. It won't work.
What it will do is it will increase the national debt massively. I mean, the thing is, I worry about Trump. I really worry about this guy. I think most people thought, look, he's a new broom. He's someone who's from the world of big business, and let's give him a chance, because we know Hillary Clinton is an extremely dodgy quantity.
We don't want her. That's why people vote. Even Democrats voted for Trump. That because they didn't want Hillary in there.
Well, look, for the record, Trump did not win the election. Hillary Clinton stole the election from Bernie Sanders for Donald Trump.
Exactly. And actually, she opened up.
Democracy work. They don't work, because she stole the nomination from Sanders.
They actually opened up opportunity.
Can you imagine what it would be like with Sanders in charge now?
Oh my gosh! But it would be. Look, you can't give everything to everybody, things cost too.
We need to have administrations that are looking after their domestic population. What it seems now, and of course the whole of the world looks at the US presidential elections with whilst biting its fingernails, because what happens in the US determines a lot of what happens in the rest of the world. It seems to me that there's not hardly any focus from the White House on domestic policy in getting US citizens feeling good, being paid well, in decent work, with good amounts of disposable income. Remember the 1960s, the 1970s, absolutely massive disposable income. And the US was one of the highest in the whole world. Here in Britain was pretty good too, but America had an amazing employment record, almost everybody with a job, and also enormous amounts of surplus income to spend on having a nice time and relaxing, and also being able to change jobs whenever they wanted to. If they decided they didn't like their boss, they could go and get a job somewhere else easily. So they've taken that away from us since the 70s, and effectively now I think the Western world is run by the banks, by the banksters, and by the people who they're effectively, the government are in these banks. The big corporations are far bigger and more powerful than the governments, and they've been emaciated deliberately because there's an attempt at an oligarchy. Well, I mean, it is an oligarchy now, effectively, with the bankers and the big businesses running the show.
They are. The big business is the corporate thing, the Davos people. They're all in there running everything. And the Bilderberg, you've documented that for years. They talk about the Logan Act, They never use that.
Remind everyone that it looks like in Venice, which is the first full weekend in June, on an island. So if you've got a sailboat or something, or whatever, make sure it's over in the Mediterranean and chugging up to Venice.
Can I sail in there on my yacht from out of Texas?
Where their meeting is I think it's an interesting place they're meeting. It's an island. It's called something like Bag Island, because Waste Bag Island, something like that, which is obviously not very romantic sounding.
Waste Bag Island, is that one?
I actually ought to. Maybe I can check and just double check to see exactly what that island is they're meeting on. But they've tried to rename it. The hotel, the Marriott chain who bought the island, have tried to rename it. The only trouble is the Venice citizens haven't really taken any notice of them, so they still call it by its original name, which is. I'll just bring that up.
How about Paradise Island or something like that?
What's it called? The Island of Roses.
Yeah, right. Island of Roses. I like that.
Everybody's really calling it that. That's right. It's called Scoop Bag Island.
Oh my God.
Casasola. right? So this is in the Lagoon of Venice, which is where the Bilderbergers are going to be meeting. And it was actually built in 1870 with a whole load of rubble dumped from a new canal which was being built in Venice. So this is, 140, 50 years old, this island. And it's just built on rubble. But anyway, so that's where they're going to be. The idea, of course, being that they're well away from everyone else. But look, well worth reminding everyone that Bilderberg is not actually the command post of the New World Order. What I would suggest is a more powerful organisation is Circle, which is the Pinay Circle, which is a much more secretive than Bilderberg.
Catholic Habsburg based or something way back.
Well, it's made up of the far right politicians, some of them serving politicians, many of them retired politicians, and effectively it's a fascist international. So the fascists like to talk about themselves, and people like to think of the far right as being something which is nationalistic. Well, it's not. I've got news for you. The international oligarchy elite have very much got together, and they want to defend their wealth. They're making vast amounts of wealth, some of them far more than they can ever spend. But still, they're obsessed with saving it all for themselves and not sharing it with the people that really need it. So that's effectively what their mission is, and they want to constantly be grabbing more territory, more resources all the time. And the Bilderberg is more of a kind of recruiting service for big political posts and other major positions like IMF. So what they'll do is effectively bring people into Bilderberg, and everyone will have a look at them. The elite, people like Kissinger will say, "Oh, this guy," and then maybe they're allowed to sit next to Kissinger at the Saturday dinner. In which case they're probably going to be the next president. So it's that kind of event, really. But these are fascinating people to talk to, and you can usually get to chat to them on the way between the airport and in this case the island.
Right. The Circle, there was a service out of the Netherlands that started exposing a lot of those inner circles like that, and David Rockefeller was a member of the Circle at one time. But his Chase Manhattan Bank.
Also in British politics, Jonathan Aitken.
Yes.
He is a super far right. He was a super far right MP, Conservative MP. But it was always the ones who were on the far right of the party. Another one's Michael Ancram. Really authoritarian. I suppose with the Conservative Party, you've got a kind of Christian wing which is fairly authoritarian, but there's a kind of moral side to it. Whereas these guys are completely opposite end of the party. So they just see authoritarian as the way to do things, and they don't really accept or listen to any criticism. That's very much like what Bilderberg is like. They are absolutely not interested in hearing any criticism or any other points of view. They've got a fixed point of view, and they want to keep well away from anyone that might critique it. Now, of course, that is totally anti-democratic. And it explains why they have an obsession with closing down people like me, the media, anyone that's actually telling the truth and giving opposite points of view from an intellectual point of view gets shut down. I mean, one thing I'd say about the European Union this week is we've had this long protracted negotiation, they call it. I don't know. It just seems to me to be a bunch of hoots that the Brussels people, Barnier and the rest of them are trying to force David Davis and the rest of Liam Fox and Theresa May to jump through. And they've said it in no uncertain terms. They've said, well, look, unless we can agree on this divorce bill, we're not going to be talking about trade at all. And so that is not a negotiation, George.
Right.
What they're saying is, unless you do what we say, because that's what an agreement.
We're going to boycott England. Yeah.
So they've agreed this week. Theresa May's had to agree, really, to pay a £45 billion bill.
Right, I saw that. Man.
Now, a lot of people are saying, well, actually, we don't owe you guys anything because we've been paying in all the way through, and this divorce bill is just simply a arbitrary ticket that you
blackmail. What it is.
Well, yeah. I mean, what I'd say is, yeah, it's a kind of blackmail. It's saying, well, look, we're not going to talk to you unless you pay this. Well, I don't think people would have been very impressed if the Brits had said that to Brussels. And what they're implying is that we need them more than they need us. Well, that's actually not a very sensible, helpful, and friendly negotiation. But in a way, it's exactly the sort of reaction you'd expect from a totalitarian and authoritarian.
Exactly, Tony. Right.
Like, for example, Brussels' relationship with Catalonia and the separatists in Catalonia too. They have voted to leave, but Brussels is saying we support you. We support the government police clampdown and arrest of the democratic president. So anyway, that's another question. But I think this divorce bill also it's interesting to see when we agreed to pay it, or when Theresa agreed to pay it this week. There was a big jump in the pound. Well, I'd say a fair, quite a reasonable jump in the value of the pound. And I think this is the way that the world works nowadays. This is not a normal, natural, reaction of ordinary people around the world saying the pound is worth. This is a reward by the financial banksters who like sending signals through the markets to individual politicians and financial journalists to say you've done something right. Yeah. It's a real simple sign, and I don't think it really... That's where we are, I think, with the financial markets. That so control a vast amount of money that as soon as you do something that the financial oligarchy feels right, your currency will do a bit better. So that's where we are with that one, George.
Well, I tell you, we've got so much going on over here. Actually, we talk about the Gladio. You've got a UK Gladio, it sounds like. They're throwing acid in people's faces over there in London. What's that about?
Well, I'm not really sure where this has come from. Who has put people up to this? Difficult to know. All I'll say is it certainly looks to me as if there has been some kind of provocation for these people to do this. The provocation, I suppose, is there's quite a lot of propaganda circulating about Muslims generally, which is, is exacerbated by the British government. It's also, by the way, exacerbated by Donald Trump retweeting the far-right tweets from Britain First. Now, let me just explain to people. Britain First has got nothing to do with Britain. Actually, you had America First, didn't you, in the Second World War over there, which was run by the Nazis. This is what Britain First is, rather similar. And by the way, that's what they were trying to keep America out of the war. And, may have been a good thing for a while, but certainly, it's certainly it's a far right front. And many of the images that they circulate, videos they circulate, are either fabricated or they're from sources which are not the sources that they're telling you. So the problem with the retweeting of the Britain First tweets by Trump was that he should have recognised that this really is a fascist, neo-fascist organisation, far-right organisation that doesn't represent any kind of sane criticism of the Islamic terrorism that's been going on, Islamist terrorism. The Gladio terrorism. So what Trump should have done, if he had any sense himself or good advisors himself, we should immediately have backtracked on that and said, I apologise for retweeting that. It's the wrong type of thing to be retweeting. Because people in Britain know who Britain First is. It doesn't seem that White House has any idea who they are. So there's all sorts of things. And there's another thing which is a provocation, really, which has been done by MI5. They put a story out, and the police in Britain saying that although we've got 300 or so people returning from the Middle East who have been trained by ISIS back to Britain, they're not going to be stopped at the airport, not going to be arrested, and they're not going to be interrogated. So there could be no charges against them, even though it would be actually fairly simple for them to be charged. And the reason, I think, is, number one, is to create the possibility for false flag attacks, a Gladio-style attacks. And then also, because if these people were to come to court, then they may well just say, well, I was recruited by MI6, George.
Right, right.
So it's a terrifically embarrassing situation that the British are in, where they've got all these trained terrorists coming into Britain, coming back to Britain, but they can't do anything about it because it would be too embarrassing if their crookery and the fact that they've been behind a lot of the proxy wars in the Middle East was to come out in court.
Right. What do you have? The arrest of these high-level Saudis over in Saudi Arabia. What's going on over there now? I know Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has been behind all this, right?
Okay, so I think what we're seeing in Saudi Arabia is a slow crumbling of the regime. Actually, this I think is measures of desperation. It's becoming more authoritarian. The people who were allies of the Saudi Arabia are being arrested and interrogated, possibly, well, it looks like tortured as well. So I think it's a bit like what my colleague Martin Summers calls a glass tower. It's starting to fracture.
Right.
It may be also that, because imagine really what's going on in Yemen and in Saudi Arabia, because these countries were set up by Britain in the Sykes-Picot and French in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Effectively, it's a civil war on the Arabian Peninsula. That's what's really going on. And what's happened is the Brits and the Americans have backed the despot, because that's what they do in the Middle East. And they're saying that the government of Saudi Arabia is legitimate, Bahrain is legitimate. Well, the people in those countries don't actually think that, even though they may be afraid to say it. So I think what we're seeing is a slow disintegration of Saudi Arabia, a rather worrying trend when you think of the amount of weaponry that they've now got, mostly from the US. And it's really interesting, isn't it? I don't know if you saw on Thursday, the European Parliament voted to ban all weapons sales from the European Union to Saudi Arabia. So absolutely amazing decision, particularly considering that Britain and America seem to be one of the only things that's propping up the arms firms in the US and the UK is the Saudis buying loads of weapons for the Yemen war, another war.
Right. Have you heard this theory about Vegas and the Saudis and they're tying up together? That's what actually was Vegas was about on the shooting on the October 1. Have you heard those theories?
No. Well, I've heard that there was some leaks supposedly from the FBI, but I've not been able to corroborate them. So maybe you can enlighten me, George.
Well, we've got these people that have zeroed in on the Las Vegas shooting, and they're saying that actually they were playing out the conflict between the pro-Solomon, King Solomon forces and the anti-King Solomon forces, and that's what spilled. I mean, part of it spilled over in their attack on the crowd.
Well, that's totally possible.
And it was a diversion. The crowd.
I think one of the most likely kind of scenarios there is that there was some sort of dodgy arms deal going on, but that somebody amongst the intelligence people involved in that, or the
best idea now, Tony, on the number of arms in Paddock's room, is that those arms are going to be distributed to a hit team that was going to go on and invade the upper floors and take out some higher-level Saudis, princes. That's what sort of the thinking is now. There's helicopters that enter into this thing, too, firing, and also helicopters that have their signals turning on and off and all that, their transponders, with false signals at times. So it's really fascinating. No one has quite a hold on this. Even Oleg Damagard is still says that this is complicated and he hasn't figured it out yet. It's not an easy thing to look at.
No, definitely not. All we can be sure, I think, of is that Stephen Paddock wasn't responsible.
Exactly. He wasn't scapegoat on this. He was.
He's executed, I think, in that
room.
I mean,
exactly.
He doesn't fit the profile of someone who would do that sort of thing. He also fits the profile of the sort of person that may have been working quite closely with the Secret Services, and they may have wished to get rid of him. He was also very knowledgeable about the financial affairs of Lockheed Martin, so he's the sort of guy, I think, who would make for them a convenient patsy, possibly. But look, I just want to say, before I go, something about what's been going on in Germany, because it's got zero coverage, almost anywhere apart from in Germany, but it's an incredibly important story. Because back in, I'm not sure whether it was April, I think it was around about the last weekend in April, 30th of April, there was an amazing story about a German soldier being arrested for planning a false flag terror attack on Vienna Airport, so that refugees would take the blame. This is all around the news services, mainstream news and everything. The interesting thing about the case was the German soldier apparently was posing as a Syrian refugee. And he had basically a double identity. So he was a lieutenant in the German army, but he was also pretending to be an asylum seeker, a Syrian refugee. He was planning an attack on Vienna airport to murder people in the airport, and then to leave a kind of trail so that the police in Austria would be following this Syrian refugee. But actually all the time he was doing it for the German army. Anyway, just the other day, he was released. So Deutsche Welle have reported that a soldier suspected of planning a terrorist attack disguised as a refugee has been released due to insufficient evidence. Now, why insufficient evidence? Well, I can tell you why. It's because the military will not have been telling anyone anything about this guy and what he was really up to. He's called Franco A, Francoa, so they haven't even named the guy. And it's drawn attention to right-wing extremists among the Germans' army ranks. This, to me, is very much a modern Gladio attack. And I have no doubt that the police, what happens in these cases, the police generally tend to go in and do a good job. What then happens is the intelligence services move in, and the courts move in, and then they stop the progress of justice. And that seems to be on the surface of it anyway, what's happened here. The Bundeswehr has got to do something about this kind of thing. And the thing is, it links up with the Oktoberfest, I think it was in the late 1970s, early 80s attack, which was another false flag attack under the Gladio, which happened in Germany. And I just think we've really got to be aware that this is what's going on. Key thing is exactly as in Britain under VIP files, exactly as in Spain under what's happened with Catalonia and the fascist corruption of the People's Party in Spain, is we don't have a functioning justice system. We saw also, didn't we, this week, the suicide of the Bosnian Croat leader guy from Yugoslavia. Amazing scenes in the tribunal for the former Yugoslavia.
Oh yes, he took poison there. Yeah,
George, that was incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was. That's a first time thing, wasn't it?
But the thing is with this, again, it's a kangaroo court. The people who really should be on trial for what happened in Yugoslavia are a whole bunch of NATO officers who planned the thing in the first place. The thing also the massacre in Srebrenica.
Yes.
The British were supposed to be bringing in air support, and at the last minute, nothing happened. And there were all sorts of the plans are. If NATO headquarters could be opened up by the International Criminal Court, I don't think there'd be any of the senior generals left outside jail.
They have them all in the docks, man. Tell you. It's terrible what's happening. The real truth out there about what's going on. Most of the people don't want to listen to it sometimes, Tony.
I think there's also, this guy Slobodan Praljak. I'm not saying he was a nice guy. All I'm saying is he was way down the food chain when it came to war crimes in Yugoslavia. I mean, the thing is with Yugoslavia, maybe people in the US don't realise, it was actually a brilliant model of marrying communism and capitalism in a kind of very sensible socialist society where you had a lot of workers' rights. So, for example, you had any large organisations had the workers, if they didn't they didn't think the guy who was running their factory was any good, they could vote him out and vote someone else in. And that actually worked really well in the car factories and things like that in Yugoslavia. And the other thing is it meant that there was a kind of camaraderie and esprit de corps in the industry in Yugoslavia, which wasn't seen in capitalist countries or communist countries. Because they're both more authoritarian in their various ways. I mean, authoritarian capitalism, that basically the owner of the place decides everything. Decides everything. In Yugoslavia, they had a different model, which was a kind of bit of both, really, and it was a very successful constitution. Anyone who's studying constitutions should have a good look at the old Tito constitution. Tito, of course, had 800,000 partisans in World War II. the end of the war, 1948-49, Stalin turned up on the doorstep with a whole army of his soldiers and said to Tito, you better do as we say, because we're moving in. And Tito said back to him, he said, if you dare to invade Yugoslavia, we will do exactly what we did to the Nazis to you. So he was prepared to stand up to the Soviet Union and to Stalin in exactly the same, because he was prepared to defend his country from Hitler. So a fascinating country and an amazing model that was smashed to pieces by NATO because it was providing another way of doing things that people might to copy.
Right. Well, I tell you what, I really enjoyed speaking this evening with you, Tony. Anything else to add on concluding or anything?
Yeah, I think the final one has got to be this article about the. I'll try and find exactly the right article, but it's about these 1,700 US troops illegally in Syria.
Oh, that's right.
The article I think is fascinating. It's as I said, I think it's from the Middle East Monitor. I think it's Justin Raimondo's antiwar.com actually. And in that article, there's some fascinating figures to do, and he links through to everything, talking about how many US troops there are in Iraq. 9,000 or so. But one of the more interesting things he says is that there are 30,000 or so US troops around the world where there is no location declared for them.
My God.
There are all these. We know that there's something like 80 bases, US bases, maybe even more than that, but certainly 80 bases around the world. I don't know how many European Union bases there are in Britain. I think the answer is 0. But the way that the US wants to put these bases all around the world is not doing anything for world peace. That's the trouble in all of this. They are, I think, I'm just trying to look at the references about it, but I'm not absolutely sure about the numbers. But there's certainly far too many bases. That's right. Actually, no, it's 800. The Pentagon has 800 bases abroad.
My gosh.
6 declared in the UK. So what we're seeing is a real attempt to take over the world, effectively, by the US, which is in cahoots with Britain, of course, and other things like Israel. And I think we just need to be aware that we're living in a very dangerous age, and that we are now sitting in what was the equivalent in the 1930s of what could become a kind of police state, like the fascist state was in Nazi Germany.
Right, that national security state has already been developed, and when they arrested General Flynn recently and questioned him, or when the FBI started questioning him before arresting or anything, they already had the transcripts of who he was talking with already. So, this is the way it's working these days. It's all recorded and intercepted, and these people are just already have a national security state, looks like to me.
That's just why things like Bilderberg are important from their point of view.
Yeah.
Because they can speak face to face, they have a complete sweep, make sure there's no bugs anywhere.
Right.
Bilderberg will have all their bugs everywhere, no doubt. And that's why they have to meet face to face. Anyone that thinks otherwise is wrong. They can't do these sorts of things over Skype or on email. They have to set up their crooked deals and make their crooked promises face to face, George.
Right.
I just remind people we do the 9/11 forum, which is 911forum.org.uk.
Right. And
you can still pick up my shows, even though my FM show has been suspended for 2 weeks. Hope to be back next Friday. At thisweek.org.uk.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tony, for being with us this evening. We always enjoy all your input and your insight.
Cheers, George. All the best. God bless.
Okay. Cheers. Bye-bye. Good night.